I'll go ahead and get started. I'll introduce myself. I am Dr. Jennifer Chambers. My current position is the director of the Literacy Specialist Program at the University of the Cumberlands. I actually teach teachers that are getting their master's degree as a literacy specialist. A lot of people are like, so I tell them my title and they're like, what does that mean? So that's what that means. I did teach in the elementary classroom for 15 years prior to this position, and I have been in this position for about 10 years. And I'm sorry if I move my hands. I teach online and I'm used to teaching with my hands. I think that just comes with it. So you'll have to forgive me. I also wear a few other hats. I'm a facilitator for the Missouri Community Action Network poverty simulation. I travel to different schools and businesses, and I just kind of walk through, what it's like to live in the life of poverty. Kind of take people through like a week long of what it's like to live in the life of poverty. And it's really eye-opening to people. I actually went through the training myself and loved it. It was very humbling. You kind of forget where you come from, and that just takes you right back to it. So I thought this would be great, especially for our teachers to kind of see where our kids, what kind of homes they're living in. So it's been really rewarding and I really enjoy it. I'm also a member of a culture audit team. I go into different schools and we do culture audits, and I'll actually talk a little bit about that into our presentation. And I'm an author of 2 textbooks and 2 children's books.
And piggybacking on what Dr. Chambers said, we invited her into our school district. I'm the director of elementary schools in Jessamine County, Kentucky, in Nicholasville, Kentucky, and that's very close to Lexington. And we actually invited Jennifer into our district to conduct the poverty simulation for all of our teachers. And it was an eye-opening experience for them because they actually got to be in that process and to experience what it was like through a role of either a parent, a child, various roles. And that was incredible. It was an incredible experience. Dr. Chambers and I worked together at the University of the Cumberlands a few years back, and we set out on this journey to create a textbook for both all of our graduate programs, whether they be classroom level for teacher leaders or literacy specialists, or whether they be leadership courses. We have one multicultural course that goes through all of those programs, and so we created this book based on our experiences from both leadership perspectives for myself, working at the Kentucky Department of Education, in turnaround schools, and working at the district level in a couple school districts, and also a principal. And Jennifer comes from the classroom, coach level, presenter. Her research is very extensive. And so together, we really felt like that gave us a good text to be able to use in all of our graduate programs in education.
All right, so my first question is just to kind of get things rolling, and I'd like for you all to just briefly think, your first thoughts, type them into the chat box. What do you think culturally responsive teaching is? What would be your definition before I actually share the definition?
Knowing your students, meeting the needs of all your students, open to differing viewpoints, being able to adjust to the culture of students in the room, appreciation of and valuing all cultures. Nice.
Yes, those are all really good. So Lori, if you just want to pop up the next one there. The actual definition that they give that we talk about and we really hone in on in our textbook is that culturally responsive teaching recognizes the importance of including students' cultural references in all aspects of teaching. So not just in 1 or 2 aspects, but it's really important, I think, to emphasize that you include it in all aspects of teaching. Being a culturally responsive teacher also means more than fun, festivals, and food. And I know that probably sounds like a weird title for this slide, but I told you I was going to refer back to the job, one of the other jobs I do, the other roles I play. I go into schools and do culture audits. And I was actually in a school one time, and I do classrooms observations, and then I also do interviews with teachers and administration. And I was actually interviewing an administrator, not a teacher, not a student, an administrator. And I asked them, how do you celebrate different cultures in your school? And the person sat there and looked at me for a minute, and they said, well, we serve tacos in the cafeteria once a month. I thought this person was joking. So I kind of laughed for a minute, and then I realized they were very serious. So I was like, okay, we really need to address what being culturally responsive is, because that is not it. It's so much more. It means knowing your students as individuals. It means being able to reflect on your own culture, yourself, and understanding that you might make some assumptions, not because you mean to. You don't necessarily do it, in a bad way. We all do it. We make assumptions about our students based on our own life experiences. We make assumptions based on what we've heard, what we know. And, we don't do it in a malice way, I don't think, but we all do it. One good way to get to know your students as individuals, I always tell my master level students, their teachers that are getting at the beginning of the year, to do a all about me bag, or do a student interest inventory. Those are all really good things. And then maybe even do another interest inventory after Christmas, because sometimes kids mature a little bit, and just to do a refresher and see, okay, have they picked up any new interests since they've been in my classroom? Have they matured and picked up anything new, a new sport, a new type of book that they like to read? So just doing those student interest inventories, doing those all about me, and just getting to know them as individuals and what they're interested in.
And cultural celebrations certainly have their role and have their place in a school culture and classroom culture. But when we look at, this is an adaptation of a couple other folks that you have used icebergs. Zaretta Hammond uses the tree. For our book, we chose the flower. And so that surface level culture, when we look at the 3 levels of culture, each level has a different impact on connections and emotional impact in relationships with our students and people in general, whether it be your employees or your colleagues or your students, or just in life. And so when we look at the observable pieces, so if we're looking at the flower, those actual blooms, those are observable when you look at a plant. And so that first level that's observable is considered surface level culture. And those are observable patterns that have limited emotional impact on those relationships. So some examples would be holidays, literature, dance, those sort of things. And those do have an impact. I will tell you, one of our elementary schools in our district has really started systematically celebrating the different cultures, the different ethnic groups represented in their school. And that has been incredible. That has really been incredible. But they've empowered students and families to be a part of those celebrations and those recognitions, it's had a great welcoming impact, large scale. But if we want to make those deeper connections, just as Jennifer talked about, if we want to make the deeper connections, we have to go deeper into those levels of culture. And so shallow level culture those are the rules that are understood. They may not necessarily be explicitly discussed, but they're just sort of understood within a culture. And those can have a very strong emotional impact on relationships. For instance, time concepts, how a particular culture views time. Parenting views can clearly vary from culture to culture. Eye contact. Some students, some teachers, we all have different perspectives on eye contact. And so getting to know these deeper levels of our students' cultures and our colleagues' cultures can make a very big impact. And then finally, the deepest level of culture makes the largest impact. And those are beliefs and norms. And those would be, an example would be concept of self. How do we view ourselves? How do we view fairness in our culture? So thinking about those things our district, our school district, on our journey, we're continuing on a journey of becoming culturally responsive in our teaching. And this was a model we adopted from Winston-Salem schools. And these are the questions that we use. We use these both in superintendent panels. So our superintendent with student panels that are students representative of a variety of cultures in our district. And so these are the questions we asked, and these can be used in the classroom that first week of school or multiple weeks of school throughout the year. But these will get you to that deeper level of cultural understanding of the students in your schools, the students in our classrooms, and just helps us make that deeper emotional connection and helps us adapt. So I highly recommend. These are very revealing. And they help you connect in such a real way.
All right, so to be effective in a diverse classroom, you must, understand what diversity is and have an appreciation of it. So I was going to ask you all what is diversity, but to save time, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it. The first thing that pops into a lot of people's head when we say diversity is race. But it is so many more things. It goes so much farther than beyond just skin color. Diversity is gender, it's reading levels, it's SES status, it's cultural backgrounds, it's parental status. It goes all the way down, to the learning style. Are they a visual learner? Are they a kinesthetic learner? Are they an auditory learner? So diversity covers so many different aspects. And to just get our teachers to understand that it goes so much more beyond just skin color. That is so important, for us to get to our new teachers that are going out into the classroom, and just anyone in general. It's so important to get that across to them. We often forget that a lot of the practices that we've done for years and years and years, I know back when I was in the classroom, when I first started into the classroom 25 years ago, there are some practices I look back on now that I even did. And I know that those were not culturally responsive practices. We need to realize that some of those may have negative effects on students that we would never have considered simply because of cultural differences. And yes, I see what you're saying. I can't see I don't have my chat box turned on, but they pop every now and then, but I just briefly saw your thing, but yes, you're correct. One example, and we'll talk about some things like that toward the end too. One example that I wanted to give that's just a very simple example, but like a favorite read aloud book. I used to read I taught third grade for 12 years of my career, and then I taught kindergarten and first grade the other couple of years. And I did read alouds with my kids all the time. They loved them and never really thought about it. I just picked up a book that I thought they would love because I loved. And I didn't think about, okay, what's the family construct in this book? If I'm reading a book every single time, a read aloud book that is made up of a mom, a dad, a brother, sister, all living in the same household, that may make some of my kids that are being raised by grandparents, that are being raised by single parents, that may make some of them feel excluded or uncomfortable. And it's not to say that we can't read those books, because we definitely can, but we need to change it up from time to time. So that's just an example of, something that we need to think about and something that we could easily change in our classrooms. So again, what does this mean for us as teachers? It means we have to change our way of thinking, change some of our teaching practices. We want to make all of our students feel comfortable and safe, regardless of their cultural differences, because a lot of times the school and the classroom is where your students are going to feel the safest. I remember having kids that would be at the end of the day, like they didn't want to go home. They wanted to stay with me because they felt safe in that classroom. They didn't feel as safe at home. So we want to make sure that we're making our students feel comfortable and safe, regardless of their cultural differences.
So one way that we can really begin to explore our own personal development in this area, so that we can begin to think about what our own implicit biases might be. And just most of you probably know this, but biases are simply truly how our brains work. And, we are exposed to so many things throughout the day, images, interactions, those sort of things. And that's just naturally how our brain processes those things. Sometimes we categorize in our brains without even knowing it. And so this piece it shows, first of all, in the center how our implicit biases sometimes form. And it begins with, we start at the top. Sometimes we prejudge a group negatively because we might not know individuals from that group, whether that be poverty in our impoverished folks in our area, or whatever, certain religions, whatever the case might be. But we sometimes prejudge those groups negatively, and then we avoid individuals from those groups, and then that leads to a lack of positive interactions with groups, and then that increases the stigmatism, our personal stigmatism of the group, and then that leads to stereotyping individuals negatively. And a lot of times we're truly not even aware of that. And so the opposite on the outside is the cycle of how to reverse that. And so the first piece is just having some time to be aware of things that trigger us or things that we may have implicit bias around. So having that awareness, acknowledging those pieces when we see those to ourselves, accepting those, and then taking action. So for example, I might have implicit bias toward a particular group of students and not even know it. But if I get to know those students on that deeper cultural level, and I understand where they're coming from, what their beliefs are, why they believe what they believe, I can then begin to take action. I can recognize that, you know what? I prejudged that student, or I prejudged that family because of my bias that I didn't even know I had. And so it's just continuing, always being open to that and having that cycle of personal development. And that really does lead to action. And I think this is a continuous process. It's an ongoing process. So if I ask you, I'm going to ask you to respond in the chat box for me. If I said, I want you to describe a school in Appalachia. So I want you to just type in immediately what images, what thoughts come to mind when I ask you to describe a school in Appalachia, a public school in Appalachia. And just really feel free to be honest. What things pop up? Images, beliefs, thought, just what thoughts emerge as you think about that, as I prompt that thinking?
White, poor, one-room schoolhouse, rural, lack of technology and Wi-Fi, outdated textbooks, small, just small, poverty.
Thank you for being honest. Exactly. And so if I told you then that this school is in the heart of Appalachia, it is a high school in an area called Letcher County in Kentucky. I was honored to be a director there for a few years, and this is their campus. And as you can see, it is a very nice campus. It's state of the art. They have some of the best technology in the nation there in that school. They have empowered students in their career pathways to be able to develop and grow and learn with a purpose, and their success rates are soaring. They were labeled and identified as a school of distinction. So you can see just how our biases are just natural to us. And so just recognizing those, and then now you've gotten to know this school on a deeper level. And so that changes when you get to know individuals or folks on a deeper level. So just wanted to give you that example.
And I just wanted to bounce off of your stereotyping, the little diagram that you showed there. I went to a week-long training in West Virginia a couple of years ago on cultural sensitivity and lots of different things. And I came back and I trained our entire College of Ed. I kind of took what I learned, added some stuff to it, took some stuff from our textbook, and just did a day-long training with all of our College of Education staff. And I wanted to focus on stereotyping because, like you said, we all do it. And it's not that we mean to, and it's not always in a negative way, but I did an activity with them at the very opening, kind of an icebreaker, where I just passed out an index card and I had everybody write down, they could choose, I think it was like, what kind of music do you like? What kind of hobbies, do you have? They could choose 2 or 3 things to write down. And then I picked up the cards, put them in envelopes, separated them into different sections of the room in groups of like 10 or 12. And then we would have like someone from group A would pick a card, they would read what was on the card, and they knew that that person was from group B, and they would try to have to pick who they thought that person was. Well, guess what? Okay, they might have said they like jazz music was one of their things. That's stereotyping. They were picking who they thought liked jazz music based on what they look like. Or, okay, that person likes skiing. They were looking at them, or they were a runner. They were looking at them based on their looks, like their athletic looks. And that is a type of stereotyping. It's not so much negative, but it's just stereotyping, and that's we all do it. So we do it with our students, and it can have a negative impact. But I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. And then we talk about ways, that we can avoid doing that sometimes. So some interesting stuff. So where do we begin? Like I said, you want to get to know your students, and I'd already mentioned those interest inventories, doing those all about me bags at the beginning of the year. It doesn't matter what age they are, they could bring in something that's culturally relevant, in their home, or how they celebrate something, or just, something they enjoy doing, but just really getting to know them on a personal level so that you can make their learning more meaningful for all of them, for each child. Your teaching practices should obviously always be student-centered. You want to be very engaging. The more you can engage students, the better, and the more it's going to stick with them. And I can't stress differentiated enough, because one size fits all doesn't work. So what do I mean by differentiated? You want to observe and understand the differences among students, and you want to use that information to plan your instruction. I know, when I taught, I spent a lot of time, and I know some teachers still do this, some don't. I wish more did. But I would have like a blue group, a green group, a red group, and I would, use what I knew about those students to differentiate the instruction for them. And I'm out observing student teachers now, and some of them I see doing that, and I'm like, yes, thank you. And then some I don't see doing that. So hopefully we can, get back to doing that a little bit more and having everyone do that. You also want to give them multiple options for taking in information. Some kids learn better visually, some kids learn better auditory, kinesthetically. So you want to give them those multiple options to take in that information. What works for one doesn't always work for all. Through differentiated instructions, students will get to the same place eventually. Sometimes it takes them longer, some others than others. But they will get there, but some of them just have to take different paths. And that's okay, as long as we all get them to the same destination. So I like to show this chart because some people just can't get a visual and they can't understand, okay, well then show me what the difference is between a traditional classroom, a differentiated classroom, and a differentiated classroom that incorporates cultural competency. So I thought this chart would show you, and I'll just go over a couple of them. I like assessment because assessment is so huge. I teach a course on assessment, diagnostic assessment in particular. So this one really stands out to me. But in a traditional classroom, you just have assessment that takes place at the end of the unit. And I don't think we see that as much anymore. I think we're seeing a lot of teachers doing more formative assessment. But at the college level, we want to make sure that we're doing this as well. We're wanting to differentiate. In a differentiated classroom, the assessment is ongoing. You're doing that formative assessment, then you're doing summative assessment. You're doing all kinds. You're doing diagnostic assessment, and the assessments that we give have an influence on our instruction. And then finally, differentiated classroom that incorporates cultural competency. Again, everything kind of ties together. The assessment, the type of instruction you're doing, the classroom climate, believe it or not, plays a big role. And the curriculum, we use the strengths, interests, and cultural background. We take into consideration the child's home life, their real life experiences. If you're teaching in a very rural area, you have to think about, okay, some of these kids are not going to have the same real life experiences that kids that live in a big city have had. So you've got to keep that in mind, because you really want to validate their individual identities. Another example, whole class instruction would be used in a traditional classroom. We were probably, a lot of us, taught that way. back in the day, traditional classroom where the whole class was taught the same thing. We all, sat at our desk and learned the same way, the same stuff. But in a differentiated classroom, you have a variety of instructional techniques. Again, using centers, using computers, just, all kinds of different ideas. And then in a differentiated classroom, incorporating cultural competency, again, you want to recognize the influence of culture and utilize those cultural resources to mediate instruction. And then finally, I'll just touch on the next one, the textbook. Sorry, Lori.
No, it's okay.
No, you're good. And like I said, we probably were used to that traditional classroom where textbooks only were used. In a differentiated classroom, you pull in supplemental materials. I know that, for my kids, I had so many different levels of kids. There's no way I could have used just a textbook because my social studies textbook, I taught third grade, but it was written on a 5th grade level. So I had to pull in supplemental material. So just make sure that you keep that in mind. And then, when you're pulling in those supplemental materials, make sure that they provide the viewpoints of all cultural and ethnic groups. When I go into classrooms to do those culture audits, I look around to see if there's a variety of books that, involve different cultures and include different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you can switch it.
So just piggybacking on that, even when you're planning instruction and sort of planning how to foster your classroom climate and culture, one of the things that can very much come into play are cultural archetypes. And so a couple of examples of those would be collectivist culture versus individualistic culture. So in a collectivist culture, this is actually, the title is backward, I apologize, but in a collectivist culture, it's relational with a group. There's a sense of belonging, there's a duty to the group, and it's this concept of we all rise together, we all fall together. And then individualist culture, that's more independent control, individual goals. It's more, I want to pursue my own goals and I don't really want to necessarily be that collaborative. And so knowing where your students are in these archetypes, also a couple other ones to consider are cultures that have a very strong oral tradition. And how are we, once we know we have students that have that, how are we incorporating opportunities to talk and to interact with each other in different ways around learning, and to use that oral tradition for students that really thrive with that. Also, cultural archetypes that involve music and movement and repetition. So all of these archetypes really can come into play in how we differentiate instruction for our students, and just getting to know them on that deeper level. For instance, if I have a student from the South American region, typically, if you look, the white would be very collectivist, so we all rise together, we all fall together. And then the dark purple would be more individualist cultures. And so this is just a map that just shows us, based on studies, where we see more collectivism versus individualism. So if I have a student from areas in South America, you can see that those vary from country to country, but for the most part, they are in that more collectivist culture. So that archetype is very present with students from that culture. And so you need to think about with those students, how do we plan for them to have, to be a part of a group mentality where we have goal setting, we work together, we help each other, and just we rise together or we fall together. Just wanted to make you aware of that. I think that's really interesting, and it's part of the book in which we talk about these archetypes.
All right, so 3 key student-centered connections in the classroom that I just want to briefly kind of go over with you. There's lots more, like I said, ideas in the book, but I just want to hit some high points. The first one is just that student-teacher connection, the student-subject connection, and then the student-to-student or peer-to-peer connection. So first of all, making that student-teacher connection is so important. You want to establish rapport with your class, and that is from day one. You have to start that minute one. You want to learn your students' names, obviously, continually refer to them by their names. Again, learn and remember information about them. That goes all the way, again, back to that interest inventory. There's so much to do. Allowing them to share their personal histories. You know, for older students, they could write an autobiographical story. You know, for younger students, they could do like the All About Me bags, like I said, or even I had my kids do All About Me posters. They love doing those. Bringing in artifacts that reflects their cultural background. You know, it could be food, clothing, music, art, anything like that. Giving personalized feedback, journal writing. My kids loved journal writing because I made it to where I had kids coming in all different times of the day. And I tell my teachers this now, and they take this back and they start trying it in their classroom, and they're like, oh my gosh, my kids love this. But my writing time was at the end of the day, which was like the worst time. They were done. It was after recess. So it was like pulling teeth, getting anything out of them for writing. But they loved journal writing because I would have it first thing in the morning. Because I had kids coming in off the bus. I had kids coming in as car riders, you know, walkers. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with all these kids? They're coming in at separate times. So I thought, you know what, I'll do journal writing. So I had this Kagan music that I would turn on, their little writing music. They would come in, pull out their journals, and I would have a prompt on the board. You know, they could free write or they could use the prompt to write. A lot of times on Fridays, I would, you know, say, write about what you want to do this weekend. And on Mondays, you know, what did you do over the weekend? And I didn't focus on the mechanics of it. You know, it was just their time to do their personal writing. And they loved that. And it helped me get to know them better. And it was something they enjoyed. And I think the most important thing too, all of the things are important according to me, I guess, but I love the last one is just maintaining and expressing your sense of humor. Just showing kids that you're human too is so important. You know, I have teachers that take my master's classes come back and they're like, we just appreciate you being real. And I'm like, you know, I just feel like that's what every teacher should do. Just be real because we are humans. You know, my kids used to see me at Walmart and it was like, oh my gosh, you come out? And I'm like, yes, I am human just like you. But even with adults, you know, when you're teaching adults, you have to be real. So just, you know, maintain and express your sense of humor. Then making the student to subject connection. You want to make sure you engage your students with the subject matter. So you want to give thought-provoking questions because you want to promote that student involvement. You've got to keep them active. You've got to keep their mind going so they don't sit there and like look at you like you've got three heads. So do those warm-up activities, breakout activities, and then wrap-up activities. So you want to keep them involved. Before the presentation, you want to activate their prior knowledge, whether it's with a pre-test or some type of activity. Then during the presentation, make sure you're asking them guided questions. And then finally, wrap-up activities, you know, have them do reflections. I know that I try to stress this to my student teachers so much to give kids time to self-reflect. Give them time to relate things to their personal life, because if you don't do that, it doesn't stick with them as well. I think the more you can let them relate it to their personal life and reflect upon it, the more they're going to, you know, be able to go back and say, oh, you know, it's going to stick with them. Let them do role-playing exercises, scripts, simulations. Like I said, that poverty simulation is so powerful, and I never would have believed it until I actually participated in it myself. So simulations are great. And then those writing to learn exercises are also good. And then finally, student to student or peer-to-peer connections, promoting peer interaction and creating a sense of community. Use icebreaker activities to warm up. This is a huge thing, you know, for kids with cultural differences. They lack self-confidence. So I think anything that you can do to kind of help boost their self-confidence, you know, you can do shoulder buddies, do those partner activities, small group activities, let them have like a classroom scavenger hunt, diversity bingo. You know, we did, you know, welcome to class bingo, and people went around and had to figure out who has a cat in the room, who has, you know, who like plays soccer. So those type of things, they had a lot of fun with that. And again, like I said, engage them in small group work as much as possible. And then strategies to improve the quality of small group work learning. Again, allow them to gather their thoughts individually. before they discuss them in small groups. That's a big, huge self-confidence. Let them think for a minute for themselves, then let them share with a partner. It's like think, pair, share. I tell my people all the time, do think, pair, share with them. Let them think, then let them pair up, then let them share. Have them keep a visible record of the ideas that they generate. Let them do flip charts or transparency sheets and then display those. Let them come to the front of the class if they feel comfortable enough doing it to report their work. That kind of holds, makes them have some accountability. And then I highlighted this or kind of, italicized it because I said intentionally form small group discussion groups comprised of students from diverse backgrounds. If you put everybody the same, that's in the same group, the same ability level, the same, the same cultural backgrounds, they're not going to learn a lot from each other. So I always made sure I strategically seated my children, like I had pods of 4. So I would always make sure that I was like, okay, I don't want 4 really high students together. I don't want 4 really low students together. I don't want 4 of the same cultural background together. So just intentionally, look at those groups before you form them and make sure that your underrepresented students are given an equal opportunity to participate. Like when they're working in those small groups, you can use talking chips. If you're doing whole group, you might want to use popsicle sticks to pull their names. I just had a conversation with one of my student teachers a couple of weeks ago when I was observing, because we're all guilty of it. You call on the person that knows the answer, especially when you're getting observed, because you want to look like you're doing a good job. So you're calling on that kid that's going to give you the right answer. But you've got to make sure that you're calling on a bunch of different kids, and then giving them that wait time too is important, because some kids need a little bit longer to respond to build up that self-confidence. They want to share, they just need a minute to think about it. So those are just some ideas. And then student-centered pedagogy, this is what we're trying to get to. It's the essence of good teaching. So every teacher's goal, every college professor, it doesn't matter what grade level you're teaching, is that you want to connect the content being taught with the experiences of the learner. You want to foster active student involvement in the learning process, and you want to promote the achievement of important student learning outcomes. Classroom engagement is not only important for the teacher, but it's also important for the student, and it provides that foundation for lifelong learning.
Okay.
Great work. This is really exciting. I've learned a lot from this. Thank you so much. I assume there's probably applications outside the classroom too. I coach kids, so some of this stuff will help me communicate better with my players as well. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Do you have any examples of the interest inventory that you do on the first, day of class, or is that provided by the school typically, or do you have your own?
I do my own. And then it depends on what grade level. Like I'm teaching a class right now, and I'm having my students give their student inventories. And I just showed them, there are so many out there. If you Google student interest inventory, I have my students specifically give a reading one, because I'm teaching a reading course. So I want to know what they're interested in reading, what genres, do they have a library card? What do they like reading, books on the computer more, or or their iPad, or like physical books. So I do that with my students now. But when I was an elementary teacher, I would have them talk about, I wanted to know their hobbies. So it just really depends on your grade level. Like I said, there are so many out there to choose from, or you can create your own. I'm actually in the process of creating my own, because I was like, I have my students give their students an interest inventory, but I want to give my master's level students an interest inventory. So I'm in the process of creating one for them right now.
And I will tell you, the slide that I shared, the Winston-Salem model, those questions, I could not believe how revealing those questions were. They're open-ended. And like I said, a principal could use those with a student advisory council or superintendent, or a classroom teacher could use those with their students. And one of the questions is, what is something you would like for me to know about you and your culture, or about your culture? And with younger students, we definitely have to explain what culture is. But once we did that, the answers we received from our students were unbelievably revealing. I remember, I'll never forget, one middle school student said, I would like for my principal and my teachers to know that if there's a disagreement outside of school and that gets brought into school, like with my sister who's also at this school, that my parents expect me to jump into that. I can't stay on the sidelines. I am expected, my family expects me to jump into that disagreement and defend my sister. And I thought, how revealing is that in how we deal with students' discipline issues proactively to help them learn how to, manage their own social, emotional needs, and just to build that connection with them so we know and can intervene before a student is suspended or expelled or things like that are highly, highly cultural. So that's just an example of one.
That's really great. We're getting tons of great feedback here from attendees, so thank you for that. And we're getting questions about the PowerPoint. Yes, you will get a recording of this, and that'll include the Winston-Salem model, the questions for that, and other things. So yeah, absolutely. Thanks for reaching out on that. When do you as an instructor disclose your information to create a sense of community? When do you talk about yourself? Is that just the first day, or do you do it throughout the year?
I definitely do it the first day. I teach 8-week by terms and I teach online. So a lot of the times my students don't meet me in person. And so I think it's so important the first night of class that they, besides just the camera, because I live in a rural area myself, and someone mentioned technology. So I'm actually in Louisville today so that I have good service. But I think it's so important that they know what I look like. They know what my interests are. They know what my family is like. They know what my educational background is. They know what my professional interests are. So on that first night, before I teach the first chapter out of the book, I do an introduction to myself, because I think that's important. And their first assignment is to do an introduction to themselves on Blackboard. So I do it the very first night.
I agree with that as well. I also think just throughout the course, sharing, being vulnerable and sharing some of your experiences in the classroom or in leadership, or just, other scenarios that help, justify or teach the lesson that you're trying to teach, can be examples or non-examples. And I think that really helps us be vulnerable with our students and our candidates, and then also just to be relatable. So definitely important.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I should mention that Dr. Chambers and Dr. Holland-Jones are authors of a publication through us, Becoming a Culturally Competent Educator. And in the coming days, you'll get a recording of this webinar, and also a link where you can request a copy of their book for adoption consideration. Once again, thank you so much. I've learned a lot. Any other questions or anything else?
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. Yes, you do use the book. Thank you for your feedback.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and onward and upward. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.